of clarity, science cannot tree ring date anything, any living organism, which is basically trees, past roughly 5,000 years old. The oldest living organisms, which are trees, to the best of my knowledge, that are dated or core dated, are trees. Many of them are up in the Sierra Nevadas. There's actually one particular tree that's named Methuselah, after Methuselah, who was the oldest person to ever live. He lived to the age of 969. They don't tell you, I've actually been up there and seen the trees. They're not magnificent looking. They don't look like the redwoods or the sequoias. They're these gnarled looking bristle pinecone trees. But nonetheless, those are the oldest ones which can be accurately dated with tree ring dating. Nothing along the order of tens of thousands of years and the like for a living organism. When it comes to fossils or other things which will date back to X amount of, let's say, millions of years and the like, so they'll typically use carbon 12 and 14 dating, which is basically everything has carbon in it and then it has a half-life when it dies. And they tried to measure the half-life against what's the extant level of carbon in the air. If I'm correct, I think it's the carbon 12 that remains constant. And the carbon 14 has a half-life and it begins to die off little by little. The half-life, quote unquote, of carbon ends at about 5,000 years, and they just, they can obviously extend that further and further. Is it an exact science? It's not an exact science because it assumes, for example, if they find a fossil in a certain rock formation, they're going to date the rocks beneath it, the rocks above it, and then come to an assumption because the rocks are X amount of years old based on what their assumption is, so then the fossil is going to be X amount of years old. Again, that's assuming that the rocks are that age. This is a little beyond the science class. I'm not a scientist for all clarity purposes, but what I will say is that God ultimately created the world in its mature form. So rocks and anything else were created to look a certain age. They're created mature. It's not like rocks were created as babies and grew over time. And the same thing applies to anything else. In terms of fossils, whether dinosaurs exist or not is a question beyond the scope of this question. But notwithstanding, a lot of these dating processes, to my understanding, are based on certain assumptions. Like, for example, the flood that we believe happened with Noah could have easily changed some of the aging processes that took place. The constellations stopped, amongst many other things that scientifically could have easily altered what we know to be the day-to-day aging that takes place in our world. So, in turn, as a Jew, we believe emphatically that the world is 5,786 years old. Whether it makes sense according to modern science or not, it doesn't change what our belief is. This is a belief. You're right, it's a belief. But nonetheless, it is a belief which is a steadfast belief based on what Torah says. There are those religious scientists that will use that, saying that each day of creation wasn't a 24-hour period, it was 1,000 years or whatever it was, more than that. The Lubavitcher Rebbe was emphatic in his opinion that the 6 days of creation were 6 24-hour periods and not 1,000 years or 1,000,000 years each day, whatever the number may be. If I'm correct, that line of thought is what's called apologetics to some degree, to try to figure out how Torah can fit into science and not vice versa, how science fits into Torah. And the Rebbe was very clear on his stance when it comes to that.